Welcome to Building Web Apps that Integrate with your portal. The slides and demos for this session are all available at the link on this page, and Heather and I will be the instructors for this session. So generally, we're going to go over what ArcGIS Online and Portal are and how we're going to work with them from a JavaScript application. We'll talk a little bit about web maps and web scenes. We'll show you how to add online content to your JavaScript application, and finally, we'll talk about working with secured services and content. There are a lot of advantages of working with ArcGIS Online, Enterprise, and Portal. First of all, that information is in this central location. It's easy for multiple people to update it. You can do a lot of work building content like web maps and web scenes in ArcGIS Online, and then save them and use them from multiple places. So you end up actually having to write less code because you have these resources that are stored in this central location and are accessible by multiple applications. So here's another example illustrating that. So we can have a large variety of apps, desktop apps like Survey123 or Web App Builder or configurable apps that all use those web maps, web scenes, and online group items that are managed and stored from within your organization. So these pieces of content in ArcGIS Online, the web map, which is a 2D map, the web scene, which is 3D, and then these group items can all be consumed by these applications and provide various capabilities to your end users. You can build these applications using version 3x of the JavaScript API or 4x. In this session, we're going to talk about building these applications using version 4, but many of the same principles apply to building an app with the older version of the API. There are a lot of resources available in the SDK. It's worth spending a little bit of time becoming familiar with them to learn how they can help you building your application. I'll just show you these briefly. So the first is the guide topic that's available in the JavaScript API SDK. This has a general overview about working with the ArcGIS platform, so working with ArcGIS Online and Enterprise. It talks about connecting to secured services, accessing public content, generally a little bit about portals and users and roles and groups, and some of the concepts that you need to understand to build applications. There are also a bunch of samples available in the JavaScript SDK. If you just enter portal in the search box, you'll see that you get back a list of samples. Some of them show how to use base maps, creating layers from portal items, saving out web maps, which is relatively new, but now it's something that we can do, loading portal items, and more. So spend a little bit of time looking at the samples and seeing what capabilities are available there. And finally, the developer site, developers.arcgis.com, has some good information on authentication and how to work with secure content, premium content, or secure services that you've created. So in this session, we're going to go over the process of building a portal item. We thought it would be interesting to sort of build an application as we went along, explaining various concepts. This is an example of what the end application will look like. People will be able to log into the application, display content from their a group in their portal, and add that content to the map.
Thanks, Kelly. So first, we're going to discuss authentication. Chances are you are probably going to need to work with secured resources within your application. And the ArcGIS platform's OAuth authentication model is what we promote and what we're actually going to be using to access the secured resources within this demo. So that example that Kelly just showed, she signed in using this, and I'm going to actually go ahead and show you in a bit here exactly how we went ahead and the things you need to do beforehand to set all of this up. So first off, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to register an application with the ArcGIS platform. Whether that is, whether it's using ArcGIS Online or using your own enterprise portal installation, you're still going to need to register the application. There's a couple of different ways that you can do that. You can do that using either the developer site or using ArcGIS Online directly. So I'm going to show you actually using ArcGIS Online, but the same concepts remain the same and the same functionality should be there. ArcGIS Online, I'm signed in. Same thing, if you do want to check out the developer site, you just need to sign in and click on the down arrow and click on New Application. So what we're going to do is underneath the Content tab, we're going to click on Add Item, and then we're going to make sure and specify an application. We're going to say we want it to be a web mapping application, and we are going to pass in the URL of, in this case, it's going to be that demo app that we're working with. So let's just go ahead, open that up, copy it, bring that in, let's give it some title, give it some tags, and just add that. Now what you can see here is it went ahead, we've got a brand new application added, brand new application item added as content into ArcGIS, my ArcGIS Online, my org. So this isn't really going to do a whole lot with working with the authentication portion. What we need to do before anything else is if you click on the Settings tab and scroll down, you should notice here we have a section here for registering the app. Okay, and just like it says, this is basically what happens here is this is where we're going to get what we call an app ID. That app ID is this unique identifier that differentiates your app from others. Okay, so you might hear it it's called an app ID here. You might see it called a client ID. It's the same exact thing. It's just that unique identifier that differentiates them. So we click on this register. And I'm going to say, hey, this is a browser app that we're working with. So, and I also need to give it a redirect URI. So in this case, that redirect URI, all that is that represents the valid places that an end user can be redirected back to once they successfully log in. So I'm just going to go ahead and just say, hey, since it's my machine that we're going to be that's going to be accessing this, I'm just going to give it my redirect URI. One thing to keep in mind is, let's say, for example, I went ahead and went on a different machine with a different, it's no longer hgonzago.esri.com and tried to access the same application. I will get redirect error messages once I log in, and it's mainly because the redirect URI is not listed as a valid, kind of like a white list of valid places of users, of valid places that the application can go to once the user logs in. So I'm going to go ahead and click register. All right, and now this is the important part. What I want you to take note of is this unique identifier that I've got. So this app ID. So we have the app ID, which can be seen analogous to like a username. And we also have the app secret. Now, I'm not going to show you that in this case. We don't need it for the purpose of this demo. But the app ID is what we will need. Just take note of this, what we will need and what we will work with within the actual code to authenticate and sign in. So we have that. Now let's go ahead and just look at the actual application. So remember what Kelly mentioned earlier, we had one big application that we created and we broke it down into separate sections. So this very first step is just authenticating. In our particular case, it's I'm authenticating against ArcGIS Online. So if I go ahead, click on this, there's not a whole lot to it since it is the very first step, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to sign in with my credentials so that I can authenticate against the against ArcGIS Online. So if we take a look at the code, make that a bit bigger. Okay. If we take a look at the actual code, there's a couple of classes I want you to take note of. We have the identity manager and the OAuth info. The identity manager is it's very helpful in the case that it handles a lot of the complexities of dealing with authentication and credentials. It takes care of that under the hood for you. So in our particular case, we are needing to access, and we will be accessing secured services or secured resources. The way that the identity manager works is if you have an application that has that needs token authentication. So you've got some secured resources in there, a layer, web map, whatever it is. And when it's trying to bring in this resource and it can't because it doesn't have a valid token, you're going to get a 404 error message. That identity manager is automatically under the hood is prompted, and it knows, oh, hey, I need to check now for a username and password. So what we have in this particular case is I have my sign in. So I have that sign in button. And on the identity manager class, there is a method called register OAuth info. And what it does is it takes in an array of OAuth info classes. So in this case, we're just using one, but the OAuth info, and I'm going to show you this in our help. So if you go to the API reference, you'll see here we've got a good write-up here within the identity manager. And you see here we have the register OAuth info. So if I click on this method, you'll see here that it takes this OAuth info class. So I'm going to click on that, and you can see here that this OAuth info, what this has is this app ID. All right, so this is the important part right here. That app ID from that unique application, or that application that we just created, this is that unique identifier. We pass in that ID into this app ID property within that OAuth info class. All right, so if we go back in, you can see here, I've got register OAuth info. I create a new instance of the OAuth info class, and then I pass in this app ID. Because it sees that I'm registering this, or because I'm registering the OAuth info, it's saying, oh, hey, we're working with the OAuth authentication model. I'm going to go ahead now, check this app ID, make sure that the redirect URI that's accessing this is valid. And if everything in my username and login matches and everything is good, then the token is generated for me under the hood, and I should be able to then access those secured resources. So I register the OAuth info, and then I call this get credentials method. The get credential is going to, which basically we just checked to see if we have a credential, and then we pass in, so on the get credential, we're going to pass in the portal URL. So in this particular case, it's just arcgis.com, and we get that credential back. All right, so now that we have that credential, we're going to go ahead and set the user ID as the sign-in button. So let's go ahead and just take a quick look and see how it works. Click on sign in, and we'll see here, because I'm already signed in ArcGIS Online back here, it recognizes that. So it's saying, hey, do you want the same person to sign in? If you don't, then you can go ahead and just sign in with a different account. In this case, I do. So I'm just going to go ahead and say, yep, allow that. And now all we have is it took that credential that I passed in and set that to the inner HTML for the sign-in button that we've created. All right, so one thing in addition to what I just showed you here is I should probably mention that when working with authentication within ArcGIS Online or within Portal, within your application, I should say, there's a couple different ways of doing it. There's a couple different approaches. There's the named user approach, which is what we are going to be working with, and that's what I just showed you. So that's when you actually go in and you pass in a username and password. And then there's also the application approach as well. And that is where you have, you'd have the client ID or the app ID and the secret set within a proxy file. And you can use that proxy file then and pass that. You can set that proxy file within your application, and you can have the application handle all of, generating and accessing the credentials for you. There's a lot of really useful information written up about all of this. I kind of just did a very high level overview of how you go ahead and just get it set up just quickly. But if you are interested in learning a little bit more, if you take a look at the, hold on here. There we go. In our developers section, so developers.arcgis.com, there's a section under documentation, and we have a section there specifically dealing with security and authentication. And they talk about all of this. They talk about the named user approach, the app logins approach, a bunch of different things to take into consideration. So just something to take note of if this is something that you think that you will be needing later on down the line. So with all of that, I am going to go ahead and make sure I did not miss anything, and I did not, because I just showed you how to register your app. And I talked about the identity manager, and I showed you the demo. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this back to Kelly, and she will take it to the next step.
Now we're going to look at step 2 from our sample application. This is how we display a map or add a map to our application. We have 2 choices. We can create a map using a 2D map, which is the web map, or a 3D map, which is a web scene. So creating the map is pretty simple. You create a web map or a web scene, and then you pass in the portal item ID of the item that you want to create a map for it. And this creates a map based on that content that you have saved in your web map. The next thing we do is we create a new scene view. The scene view defines how that map content is displayed. So we provide the map that we just created. We provide viewpoint or an extent. So in this case, we've provided a zoom level and the lat long coordinates for the center of our map. We also specified a container. So in this case, it's the ID of the DOM node where we want the map to display. So in this previous slide here, we provided a portal item ID to the web map in order to create a map based on that web map content. So we get that by going to either the map or the item details page in ArcGIS Online or Enterprise and going to the URL. If we look at the URL, we can see that we have this unique identifier here, kind of like a barcode for that item, that we can then paste into our code and use to create our map. Web maps can also contain these saved extents called bookmarks. So you can create them in the ArcGIS Online map viewer and save them with your map. And then we can use the bookmarks widget in the API to display those bookmarks to people. So if we look in the SDK, we can see we have a bookmark sample. It displays a list of the bookmarks, lets you add and create new bookmarks. So in order to use this widget, it's pretty straightforward. You just create the new widget, pass in the view, and define whether you want people to be able to add or edit bookmarks. Perhaps you want to provide a view-only list of named or saved extents. So when you do that, it's reading the web map. It's reading the web map to see if you have any bookmarks available. And if you do, it's going to populate this list of bookmarks. With the web scene, it's a little bit different. They're not called bookmarks, they're called slides. We don't have a widget to display them, but we do have a sample in the SDK. I found this one by searching for slides. Basically, they look at the scene and then look for the presentation/slides to get access to these pre-saved named extents. And then they write a little bit of JavaScript to create a view or to create a way to look at those different slides. So here we're just doing it by touring through a set of these extents. So they just navigate to each one of the slide locations and display it. So let's look at the map we should have at this point. So Heather showed you how to get authentication working. We can log into this application. And then we saw a little bit of logic that shows how to add a web map. In this case, we added a web map and then display it in a scene view. So we're looking at a 3D view. Let's take a really quick look at the source code for our application at this point. So with Heather, we saw how to handle authentication. And here we're just going to take a little bit of code from that slide. We'll create our web map using this portal item. And then we create this scene view, which is our 3D view of that map content.
Great, thanks, Kelly. All right, so now we've authenticated, we've added a map. Now we actually need to connect to whatever portal it is that we're trying to connect to. In our particular case, we're just going to be working or connecting to arcgis.com. So let's just take a quick look at the API reference before we even get started. When we talk about the portal, if you scroll on down here within our table of contents, you should notice here we have our Esri/portal namespace. And within it, we have a bunch of convenience classes that are provided to us. Basically, what these classes do is they wrap up specific functionality that is provided to us within the REST API when working with the portal calls. So it just makes things a little bit easier instead of having to go in and set a bunch of REST API endpoints and making calls to those. We are wrapping that functionality up within these specific classes based upon what it is that you're trying to access and what it is that you're trying to do. So we're just going to focus in this part on the overlying portal class itself. So if you just go to Esri_portal and then just uppercase portal, and you can see here just by scrolling down, there's quite a bit of information. What this does, by loading, we have a load method off of this. There's a lot of methods, but what we do is when we load a portal, what it's basically doing under the hood is it's calling the REST API's portal self call. And it's going to return that response and basically the properties of that self call. And that's what we have provided to us within this class. When we talk about the REST API, it might be easier if I just show you. If you go to the developer's help and just go to documentation and click on REST API, and if we go to, just go to working with users, groups, and items, you'll see here there's a bunch of information here. A lot of useful information of working if you need to go in and get under the hood within the actual API itself. But we aren't going to go through all of it. What we're going to focus on here is this portal self resource. And just like it mentions here, is all this does is it just represents the view. Okay, so what the view is of that portal that's exposed to the user that's currently logged in at that time. So if we click on this portal self, you should notice here, again, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of information. There's a ton of properties that get returned to us. We'll just take a look at the top ones here. Access all SSL. We take a look at the portal convenience class within the API reference and take a look at the properties. We have very similar properties that are provided to us here that we can that are basically what's happening is it's using these REST API calls under the hood. Okay. So what's happening in the portal itself is what you get here when loading up this portal instance, this portal class instance. Okay. So we've already looked at that. We talked about the self call. You can access custom groups. You can access, and basically, like I said, it's going to be the view of what that portal is based upon whoever's logged in at that time. In addition to this, we also have these things called helper services. So if you have maybe like your own custom print service or a custom routing service, you can also get access to these services as well through the portal properties. All right, so before we even go to the demo that we have here, I like to see this just because it kind of helps me get an idea of what it is that we're actually working with. So if you go to arcgis.com, all I'm going to do here is I'm just going to open up, I'm in Chrome, I'm going to open up the developer tools for Chrome, and I'm going to go to my network tab, and I'm going to sign in. So I'm passing in my credentials. And what we should see here now is I have this self call. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to open this up in a new tab. And you can see here that it returns this JSON, but it's returning all of this. These are the response properties that I have of this view of my portal based upon my login. So this is the information that I can get that is accessible to me when I call portal load. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a quick look at that demo. All right, so right now what you see here is there's not a whole lot to it. It's just basically saying explore portal. I have my map and I can sign in. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sign in. And since I already signed in up here, it's remembering that. So I'm just going to say, yeah, go ahead. We're just going to use the same account. And what you should notice now is that it recognizes, oh, hey, okay, the portal is loaded. And the reason I know that is because it's changed. Instead of just explore, ArcGIS, it's now exploring the actual organization name. In my case, the organization I just logged into was Esri ArcGIS API. So if we took a look at the code that went on behind this, it's very straightforward. All I have is a function called load portal. And in this function, I'm creating a new instance of this portal. And then all I'm doing here, and like it mentions here in this comment, I have it commented out. But if you set that to immediate for the auth mode, it's going to automatically prompt that user regardless to sign in. Okay. So all I'm doing now is calling the load method. That is it. And it prompted me to sign in. I provided my credentials. And based upon the credentials, after I signed in, it's going to go in and pass in that portal name into the title that we saw in the top. So we don't really have a lot going on right now, display-wise, but under the hood, it now, like I said, once we loaded that portal, we now have access to all of these, the portal's properties. So we can do a lot more with that. All right, so now we got it started. I'm going to turn this over to Kelly, and she's going to take it a step further.
Now we're at step 4. We've created the map, we've logged in. Now we're going to look at how we can get content from ArcGIS Online or Enterprise. There are a bunch of different properties available to query content. So we can query groups on the portal, we can query for items, and we can query to find users. If we find a portal group, we can also query that particular group to find items and then get their favorites. So this slide, remember the slides are all available at that link we provided at the beginning of this session. But if we click on these items in the slide, we can get to the SDK and we can look at all of the methods that are available. So we'll just take a look at a few of these. So query groups, it takes in some parameters, query parameters, and some options. So the query parameters is this PortalQueryParams object. And then we'll look at this in the source code in just a minute and see the available options. But all of these methods take in these PortalQueryParams that let you provide things like an extent to query for portal items within, the number of results to be included in that response, a query string that you're going to use for the actual search, and then you can provide some sort options. So again, it's the same general idea for working with all of these methods to query for content. So here's a little bit more about the portal query params. Here, we're actually building our query. So in this sample application, we want to look at a bunch of different layer types because we have our sample app that lets you add one of these types to the map. So we're looking for feature collections or feature services or map services, but we're not looking for code attachments or featured items or symbol sets or some of these other items. So in the code logic, we're seeing if there's a logged in user. If there is, we want to get the items for that logged in user. If not, we're just going to generally use the layer types as our query and just get back a few general publicly available items. So once we've got those results, we can display the query results. We get these back as portal query results. So here we are performing a query item, we're passing in the current views extent, and we're passing in that query that we created and waiting for that method to execute and finish and return us a list of results. So we'll look at what our app looks like now, and then we'll take a look at the source code. So here we have our sample application. We've queried that portal. We got a list of layers that are publicly available, and we can add these things to the map. We'll go look at the source code. We're now at step 4. Again, all of the source code is available in that GitHub repository that we linked to on the first page. So here's step 4. Let's close this down. Here's step 4 where we connect to the portal. We wait for the portal to be loaded, and then we create that layer type collection. Remember, we're looking for all of these different types of layers that we can create a query. If someone's logged in, we'll append the owner name to that query so we get those users items rather than just general items. And then we perform our query items. This await keyword is waiting until our query is done. When it's done, this item results collection will be populated with the results from our query. And then finally, we will display those results. So here's our logic to display those results. We take the items that were returned and we just write some JavaScript to build this HTML that displays each of the individual items that we want to display in that side panel. For each one of these, we add this Add to Map button so that users can click on it and add that item to the existing map.
So the next step, basically all we have to do now is we're just going to go in and wire up a click event handler for those buttons that we have listed here to add each of these items to the map. Once we wire up that click event handler, we're then going to go in and call this add layer to map function call, which will actually add these layers to the map and center then zoom into the full extent of each of these layers. So we have 2 steps to this. Basically, we're going to go in and we need to iterate. So we're iterating through each of these buttons that we have listed there within the scroll bar. And we're grabbing those IDs from each of these items, each of these portal items. And then we're also calling, like I mentioned, this add layer to map function. So let's just go ahead, let's just open this up and take a look and see. It might be easier sometimes, I think. So the first part, we're just adding this click event handler. All right, so all we're doing here is we are iterating through the buttons that we had listed for the add to map. So we're iterating through each of these. And then what we're doing is we're calling the this add layer to map function call. So the add layer to map, if we take a look at this, what we have here, and this is something this is new in 4X. If you haven't worked with this before, then this might be a pleasant surprise. you were able to bring in, if you worked in 3, you were able to work with and bring in web maps and access layers off of the web map itself. But you might have hosted feature layers, or just hosted a hosted feature layer service within ArcGIS Online or your portal that you want to access directly off of that item. And you can do that now using 4x. We have this layer from portal item method call, and all you do is you just have to pass in that unique item ID of that hosted layer. So what we're doing here is we're iterating through these. We're getting the unique, or we're getting that that item, so that portal item, from each of these portal items, or these layers that we have added here within our scroll bar area. And then what we're doing is we're saying, hey, once I click on one of these, I'm going to call this add layer to map, pass in the item, so that portal item, and then we're going to go in, and we have in 4x, we have a way to watch properties and do something based upon a certain property. So in this case, we're saying, hey, I want you to watch the load status property off of this layer. And then if that status is actually loaded, what we're going to do is we are going to call the goTo method off of the view class and pass in that layer's full extent and add that to the map. So if we take a look and actually see how this thing works, you'll notice here, I'm not signed in yet, so it's just saying Explore Portal. It's just giving me the default stuff. So I'm going to go in, sign in with my credentials. And I already signed in earlier, so I'm just going to go in and say, yeah, just allow this. So now what it is, it's showing me I got a bunch of stuff, a lot of things I've been working on and testing and playing around with. But what you should see here is now it's updated to show my org. And in addition to that, some of the portal items that I have specific for, that are saved directly under my credentials. So we'll just go ahead in here. I don't know, let's add the congressional districts. So we'll click on this, click the add to map. And now you should see here that it automatically brings the layer in, and it will zoom then to the extent of that layer. I can go in, I can change this. I can add this Naperville building footprints, and that's going to zoom into, and it's not very nice looking because I added this beforehand. But as you can see here, it does zoom in, and it shows these building footprints of this Naperville area right outside of Chicago. So again, all I did in this particular case was just wired up the event handler, iterated through my items, grabbed the item ID, passed that item ID into the from portal item method, and then once that layer was loaded, I went ahead and added the layer to my map at its full, and zoomed to its full extent. So Kelly's going to go ahead now and finish things off. Next, talking about widgets. Thanks.
Let's look at the next step, which is adding widgets to our application. We can add widgets like Basemap Gallery and the search widget, and they can take advantage of content that we have in Portal. So in the Basemap Gallery's case, you can pass in the portal URL or set the portal URL on Esri config, and we'll see that in just a minute. And it's going to look at your ArcGIS Online portal instance, and it will look to see if you have a default Basemap Gallery group, and it will use that if it's available instead of just the standard base maps that you get. The other thing is search. If you have locators defined for your organization, it can use those locators as well. So let's look at a code pen I have that shows this. So here's a code pen, a sample application that has a map and some widgets. We have the search widget, print, and Basemap Gallery. So it's pretty standard. We just have one default locator. We have the out-of-the-box base maps and a scale bar that's set to miles. But if I come in here and define the portal URL, in this case, I'm setting it for the whole app using esri/config.portalurl. I set it to my org URL, and we can see that we have a lot of things that changed. We have the search locator or the search widget now contains additional locators that were defined in our organization. We zoomed in a little bit, so we're taking advantage of the default extent. We added some theming that we get from the shared theming, and we changed the default base map. And if this org had a custom base map group, we would also see those base maps listed here. So you can see that we have a couple of them that are not in the standard base map group. So if we look at this code, let me zoom in a little bit. Some of the key things to point out is, again, we set this portal URL. Here it's to our org URL. And then here we're checking for that when we create the map, we're looking to see if our portal has this use vector base maps property set to true. If it does, we get the default vector base map from the organization. If it doesn't, we just get the standard default base map. We also set the extent to be the portal's default extent. This might not be appropriate in all apps, but for this particular app, we wanted it to be zoomed to that org's default extent. Same thing with things like a scale bar that take in units. We can look at the portal units and see if that organization has said, hey, metric or non-metric units, and respect those in the scale bar. So we have portal URL set, so we don't need to pass portal into the search widget. Because we have the portal URL set in the app, it will add any locators that are defined in that organization. So same theme with the Basemap Gallery. Finally, another thing that we did here is we have the print widget. In your organization, you can have helper services, and you could have your own print task URL defined. If so, we can use it here in our application. And then the last thing is you can define shared theming. So you can specify things like background color, text color, button color, and a logo for your organization. And you could read these properties from the portal and apply them in the app. Here we just do some, add some custom styles to our app to use those properties defined in the portal properties shared theming. So we saw this in action with the scale bar. We could use the units from the portal. For the time slider, you can actually configure in the online map viewer, you can set some time properties. Those are also stored with the web map, and your app can read those in and apply them. So here we have a sample also in that GitHub repository that it looks like it's just using the time slider. But if we examine the source code for this, and you can do so at your leisure, you can see that we're reading in the properties that were saved with the web map. So here's our sample app again, where we have these widgets added. We can look at our app source code here, and we can see that we have this add widgets property, or method, sorry. We can call add widgets. We can look at the source code. The source code basically adds search. Here we're passing the portal in, but remember we could also set Esri config .portal URL. And then same thing with the Basemap Gallery. We pass in the portal so that when we run our application, it's going to use those groups and locators that are defined in your organization. A new feature that we added recently is the ability to save content. So you can save a web scene or you can save a web map. So here are two little snippets of code. The general idea when saving a new one is that you update your scene, and then you can call save as, and that's going to create that item and save it with this title and information. You can also overwrite existing ones. You do the same approach. You call update from, you make your changes, and then you call save on the scene, and that will also update it. There are samples available in the SDK that you can take a look at called Save a Web Scene, which has some information on how to save a new item, overwriting an item, some good information there, and you can actually explore the code as well. So there's also the Save a Web Map. Same thing, some information along with the sample on how to work with these features. Finally, theming. We sort of saw this when I showed you that CodePen sample, and I'll show you that again in a minute. In your organization, you can apply this organizational defined branding. So again, you can upload a logo, you can add a link to that logo, you can set background color, foreground color, button background color, and button foreground color, for example. So if we go back to our app, we can see that this green color comes from our organization theming. We defined that. This logo, not a super great example of a logo here, but this demo logo, we place it here on our map because we're reading it from the app. If there was a logo link specified, we could read that link in and make this a clickable logo so people could access it that way. So shared theming is a great way to apply branding to all of your applications and let it look like the other applications look in your organization by reading those properties. So again, all the slides and demos are available at this link that we provided here. So we encourage you to go take a look at those and to ask questions if you run into any issues when working with those. Thanks.